Did you ever quit during a job interview and noped out of there? If so, why? We won't give you a contract until you've bought your uniform and paid for your training. Yeah, no. Job I interviewed for at a shitty clothing store was just like that. There is no dress code, but we highly recommend you only wear things purchased from our store. Having looked at prices of clothing there and seeing nothing under $50, I noped out. Edit. I can't read or write. Last year this was ruled illegal in the UK. Clothing stores were doing this all the time, requiring staff to buy their clothes, and it was taken to the courts. If you have to buy your uniform on a regular basis, to keep up with trends, then you are effectively being paid under the minimum wage. If you are so sure you will sell your clothes by the staff wearing advertising them, then you should give the clothes to staff for free. It's what my store does. There is no requirement, but we highly recommend. Good lord, do I hate this kind of talk. Is this your expectation, or not? Are there managers in the world who truly can't grasp the benefits, to both of us, of just putting the actual expectations out there to be known? They probably can't have the requirement legally, so they recommend it, and then accuse you of not being a team player if you don't comply. When I asked how much they'd pay me, and the response was, you can make as much as you want. We work hard and we play hard. And by play hard we mean we have seltzer water and occasionally cater panera. Oh, and team dinner. What do you mean you can't make it because you haven't seen your children in 6 months? I remember when "but we'll buy lunch if you work through it" on this important project seemed like it was a great thing. When you're first starting off, eager to show what you can do, and free food. Once you get a little older and established, that rapidly becomes great. You bought me a $10 sandwich at Panera that looks like they threw all the ingredients in the air and it all landed in a box, and they served that to me. Also, I can give you my time and be totally overstressed that I didn't even get a goddamn 1/2 hour to take a break from work. A good friend of mine was on an assignment with his company in Atlanta. He gets meal allowance every day in travel, a $50 max for dinner 2 nights in a row. They catered so the employees wouldn't be troubled with going somewhere to dinner. He said he just left anyway. He was getting a damn steak, not eating Panera. Your comment reminded me of that. I recently had someone try to recruit me to It Works. I added her as a friend before I really knew it was a pyramid scheme, and I saw all the cringy posts about the nasty celery smoothies she drinks and team parties she hosts. She made it sound like a social media managing type of job initially. I did the complete 180 after I learned better. The last person that said that to me turned out to be working 3:30 AM to 6:30 PM on average. The job was salary too, so no overtime or anything. A few 10-minute games of pool a week isn't making up for those hours. I won't work for anyone that says that again. Everybody dance now. Sounds like pyramid scheme talk. You just have to buy this $500 startup kit, and then sell product to all your friends and family as you recruit more people. You'll make more money. You'll learn the joys of owning your own business. Ready to start? When? Had that answer once. My response was $100,000 a year. They laughed. I walked. My first question before the interview really even started was concerning their intended wage range, and when they told me, I thanked them for their time and then got up and left. I hate when places waste everyone's time by not putting wages out in front. When I'd been laid off several years ago, I was looking at a variety of things because there weren't many jobs in my field in my area. I applied for an airline for a job at the airport. Small commuter airline. I thought it would be fun. I'd been in the travel industry before, so I decided why not. Manager called me and told me straight up it's minimum wage, part-time and shift work. Are you still interested? No. I appreciated he was so upfront about it. Saved us both some time. Yeah, you gotta appreciate the honesty. Probably not a bad person to work for, TBH. Many times the hiring manager is just a pawn and has no real power. The home office sets the wages and terms, and these constraints handcuff the managers as much as the new employee or the candidate. This guy had probably been burned 100 times, just from the other side of the equation. My mom had an interview recently, and when she asked what wage they intended to pay for the position, the dude told her that it's unprofessional to ask how much you're going to be paid during an interview. He said it makes you look like you care more about a paycheck than you do the job. And X200B. In my opinion, this dude is unprofessional and should not be allowed to interview people. Unfortunately, that's a pretty common old school attitude. I had a lengthy disagreement with a college professor who used that same argument. I'd seriously ask them if they would take a job without knowing what they are going to make. That's just ridiculous. My bills and expenses are X. My paycheck is Y. Would you take a job without knowing if Y is going to be less than X? Would you be teaching here if they didn't pay you? Fuck no. Your college professor was a narrow-minded moron. I assume he was an old fart who got used to not having anyone argue with him. Typical in professors, and more typical in old people. The reason behind not talking about wages for bosses to have ignorant employees who don't know how much they're worth. Bosses are the only ones profiting from ignorance. Oh no sir, I came here to work for the company. I love the company. I don't work for money. Can I work overtime for free? What a fucking idiot. He doesn't even know what the word unprofessional means. It is literally professional to ask a question about wage at a job interview. Unprofessional would be to ask something completely irrelevant to the work. Comma makes you look like you care more about a paycheck than you do the job. That's like the definition of a job. He's thinking of hobbies. Yes, a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck and it shouldn't be frowned upon to see if the rate of pay lives up to your budget. I wouldn't be applying for jobs if I didn't care about a paycheck. Exactly, it's so ridiculous. They want you to sell yourself as an employee but don't want to sell themselves as an employer. I applied for a senior director of marketing job, and did a phone screen going through my experience for level an hour, discussing my handling of multi-million-dollar annual marketing budgets, leading PR for a $1.2 billion construction project, all that. You sound amazing. Do you have any questions for us? Yes. The recruiter who contacted me said the pay was what I should expect for someone with my experience. What does that mean to you guys? About $40,000 a year. Thanks, but no thanks. Why? Well, I'm making 3x that right now. Why did you waste our time having us interview you then? Dude, the whole based on experience thing is the biggest fraud bullshit ever. Anyone with decent experience and a successful career almost always makes more money than these hiring based on experience companies. Do you think that at some point, they realize that getting a senior director for $40K wasn't going to happen? It's marketing. There's a lot of kids on the entry level and junior side who will work for title. He even had the audacity to try and blame you for their own mistake. They do that shit on purpose so they can say there's no qualified applicants and bring in a cheap H-1B. Commensurate of experience, aka if we told you, you wouldn't apply. Yeah, the last place I worked at advertised a potential TPN up to $80K a year in their employment ads. What they didn't say in the ad was that to earn that amount you would be working every weekend and a lot of overtime to get anywhere near that figure. I earned about half of that while I was there. I had a similar one make $200 a day every time someone got lucky and hit $200. It was like a celebration. The really good people didn't even make that every other day. Every recruiting sales job in my area posts using that salary and phrasing for some reason. Potential up to $80K. It's like it's close enough to reality but still way higher than most jobs that it suckers and a lot of people. I had something similar. They brought it up midway through, but I went in for a job interview at a place. Everything went well. The salary sucked. $12 an hour. But I needed work. I needed a day to think it over. So I told them. The next morning, they called me back, saying they went with someone else. Not even a week later, there's a promo in the newspaper for that same position with the company. The ad states now hiring $17.50 an hour, so I take the paper with me and go back. Pleasant enough chat. They offer me the position on the spot, offering me $10 an hour. I point out that the paper said $17.50 and show them. They say, oh, not sure how it got to that amount. We're only offering $10. I also bring up I interviewed here within the last 2 weeks, and the offer $12. They said, it's $10. Take it or leave it. So I left, then told everyone as I walked out that it was only $10 an hour. Most everyone also left. Sounds illegal. They list competitive salary and in the interview offer 30% less than the market rate. Sure, that tactic works on fresh grads, but anyone with more than a year in their industry knows what competitive salary means. We meant it was competitive for us. After scheduling an interview, I always phone ahead asking for their intended pay. If it's insufficient, tell them. They'll either raise it, unlikely unless they're desperate or you're way more qualified, or you can cancel the interview without wasting your time. If they don't want to tell you, just take it as the red flag it is and move on. If they decide not to hire you for calling ahead, you've dodged a bullet. I went for an interview at a sales company, whatever that means. I was 17 and just wanted an easy job. Thought it would be a door-to-door thing. When I got there I was surrounded by businessmen in suits, all looking really panicked. I got into the interview and the guy looked really shocked to see me, but I instantly smelled something fishy. Worked out pretty quickly it was a very polished looking pyramid scheme. When he started to explain the emphasis on getting results and how the pay worked, I stood up, told him he clearly didn't pay attention when sorting through the CVs and that it wasn't for me, shook his hand and walked out. On the bus home I figured out that my shirt was on inside out the whole time. Total professionalism on both sides. Friend and I went to one of those interviews. Yeah, both in business clothes. There was a break. He and I looked at each other, realized we both were smelling a pyramid scheme, and walked out. Looked it up later and realized we were right. A few years later, my brother told me that he'd been hired by this great company doing sales, and he thought I should apply. I called it by name and said, if that's it, don't do it. It's a pyramid scheme. He got very angry. Went all in. My mom bought all their crap for him to use for demonstrations. Never sold a thing except the demo stuff, which my mom ended up keeping. He and I never spoke of it again after that first argument. Oof. I was thankfully able to save my little brother from his investment, but I had help from the entire family too. Let me take a guess. Cutco? I love that you added the last part, lol. The world would be a better place if everyone was this professional. Part-time, split shifts, lol. What are split shifts? Come in for 4 hours, leave for about 3, come back for 4 more. Oh my god, I didn't even know that was a thing. I don't know if we have this in my country. I've seen it a lot in restaurant jobs. Work the lunch and dinner rushes but off for a couple of hours in between. I've seen it in some vacation communities that I've lived in where locals have to grind it out during the on-season because you make most of your money during summer and ski season. But in the cities, it's just shitholes and usually Asian restaurants that do this and everyone knows to avoid them. Fuck that, holy shit. Man, I hate split shifts. Yeah, it's almost always work 10/12 hours but get paid for 6/8. You really get to enjoy your Saturday by working 4 hours, driving 20 minutes home to sit for 3 hours, then drive back for another 4. Can't really do much, because you're worried about getting fucked and not being back in time. Few times I forgot to clock out, so glad I left food service. Yeah, I can't stand them either, and companies are forcing people to do them more and more by breaking up straight shifts. I was in an interview to be a math teacher at a school with 7 openings. Just a continual mass exodus at an awful school. It was a 5-minute drive from home, though, so I decided to check it out. The first question I am asked is what I do if a student has a cell phone out in class. I said that I usually take the phone and give it back after class, but if the school has another policy I would be glad to follow it. The interviewer's immediate response was that she didn't think I would be able to build relationships with their students with that kind of mindset, so she would be fine with concluding the interview at that point. I agreed and walked out, completely blown away. No wonder why they can't keep teachers. I already had a contract with another school, so it was whatever to me. I'm so curious what the right answer would have been in the mind of the interviewer. Do she think a better approach would be to just let the kid play on his phone all class long? You are supposed to put on sunglasses and teach them cool skateboarding tricks while teaching the lesson. Then say looks like math isn't whack after all. Am I right? Homies really reach the students. They will put away their cell phones and study hard. Don't forget to rap awkwardly. http://existentialcomics.com/comic/220 to establish your trustworthiness. You shouldn't learn about squares from someone who's a square. Mayoaru as an educator, I swear this is what some people sound like. I have great relationships with my students, but I'm not going to be a pushover. The staff member who started the interview noticeably changed when the manager walked in. I had a gut feeling and watched her interact with him. I knew he must be an ass. I turned down the job and left. How did her behavior change? I would guess the interviewer went full Eskisser. Very good intuition. You likely dodged a bullet. The one I should have quit. My act was at 1 PM for a temp company signup. You know, WHMIS policies, GovTwork regs, and apparently they expected people to make themselves familiar with the contents of a 4-ring binder and sign off that I understood various sections. Half of what I had to sign off on wasn't even in the binder. The 1:30 act showed up and still no interviewer. So I went to the desk and said yada yada, let's go. They asked me to wait a few more minutes. I did. A back office door opened a few minutes later and a woman who had obviously just finished crying stepped out and called the 1:30 over. She explained that her grandmother had passed away and she'd like to reschedule. Then she turned to me with a fake smile and started leading me to an interview room. I protested, saying I could come back and that she was in no condition to work, but she brushed me off saying her family would be a while picking her up yet. I don't know why I didn't leave. It was awful. She stared at the computer monitor the whole time, robotically asked me the standard questions and typed answers. The only thing I could do was read the what to do in case of a bomb threat poster on the wall behind her head. They asked me to pay for administrative fee. It's a giant red flag. Yet no legitimate company is ever going to ask you for money, especially in a job interview. A fast food chain in my area that's big enough to do business in multiple states was not only doing on-the-spot interviews, but they charged each applicant $20 for their own background check. I thought it was something only scams did until I saw it there. I was told that I would have to sign aircraft off for return to service even if I wasn't the one doing the work or inspection. I worked hard to earn my certification and am not risking someone else's mistakes going on my record. I hope you reported them for that. Nothing in writing, so nothing could be proven. They were a reputable company. I was an individual technician in search of work. I've had a couple of jobs in aircraft where this happened in-house on particular programs, although it wasn't a requirement. Never heard of one that would risk their business advertising it in an interview though. Yup, because I realized it was a well-hidden pyramid scheme. Well hidden because it had MX's name slapped on it, so I figured it was a legit financial advisor job. I should have walked out immediately, but I was too young and inexperienced to see the red flags ahead of time. Guy who called to set up the interview was not in HR. Strike 1. The interview was at 7 PM. Strike 2. When I got there, I realized it was a group interview with like 10-15 other people. Strike 3. I should have turned around and walked out then, but I was young and naive or dumb, and still thought maybe it was somehow legit. The interview started and the only question any of us was asked was our names. The guy goes right into basically what I know now to have been a MLM presentation, talking about how all of us can help each other and him make money, while advising clients, etc. I sat through the initial 45-minute presentation and then the guy said something like, if this great opportunity doesn't sound like a fit for you, you're free to go now before we start the sign up and training. I stayed put for a second, not wanting to be the first in what I assumed would be a stampede out the door. Waited too long and the guy started to talk again, so when I got up to leave it was super awkward with everyone watching me since I was the only one to take off. Well done. Thumbs up. Guy who called to set up the interview was not in HR. Strike 1. Wait, is this usually a strike? My last job at a legitimate business was a call by my manager. No, not usually a strike. When I started at my company a year ago I was called directly by the department manager. We still don't have a full HR team. It's entirely possible that the other 10-15 people were mostly people already in the program. They never would have sat you next to someone else that was new, so at least 8 of those them were members. Never thought of that. You may very well be right. It did seem like the rest of them were way too engaged, nodding, leaning forward, etc. for what was a pretty dry presentation. Not to mention the fact not one of the other new people thought, this is bullshit, probably lends credence to your thinking. I went to an interview for a tech firm. The job's hours meant that most days I'd get off work about midnight. During a break in the interview process I went outside for a snack and saw the lead story on a newspaper. It said 2 violent drug gangs were having a turf war and the border between their territories was the pedestrian mall right outside the building where I'd be working. The idea of walking across a dark, deserted pedestrian mall to a mostly empty parking garage in the middle of the night across the front lines of a gang war didn't appeal. I might have been overreacting, but I decided right then and there to accept another offer. I can totally understand that, Better to be safe than risk being shot and dying in that mall, thinking I knew I shouldn't have taken this job. I had a job interview and they purposely didn't tell me where they were located. The interview was at a second location. During the interview she quietly said a street name. I got a call a few days asking when I could start. I googled the street name, found the address. I had to google the owner's name and find the LLC they owned. I found the address and looked at the building on Google Maps. I immediately knew that was one of the most dangerous streets. It was in a terrible neighborhood and the only other thing on the street was a Section 8 apartment complex with a high crime rate. I figured I'd be lucky to only have my car stolen. A month later someone was shot nearby. Nope, not worth the money. The interviewer raised her voice and became verbally abusive during the interview. I stood up, announced the meeting was over, and left. Do tell us more. That occasion was an early interview and I had other options. The decision to end that interview was based on an earlier experience from a part-time job during my teenage years. It's more valuable to tell you about that because I had made the mistake of accepting it. During the interview when I was 17, a retail store manager had asked what would you do if a customer has a problem? I replied, it depends on the situation. The interviewer barked back, no, you get a supervisor. Adolescents deal with angry reactions from adults on a semi-regular basis, so I really didn't know how to assess that response. After a moment of silent surprise I assured the manager I would follow store policy. I got hired, but the work environment was a nightmare. Lesson learned. When someone with enough authority to conduct interviews doesn't maintain professional demeanor at the interview, then it's likely they don't have much competence at all and the organization tolerates that. Outward-facing courtesy is a minimal standard. It's like the Karen of managers. Holy shit. Tell them you're having a problem with them and would like to speak to their supervisor. Brilliant. Wished I'd thought of that. LOL. I am curious as to what you think triggered the verbal abuse. Don't know. Don't care. I certainly had enough sense not to give any provocation. Even if I had, there's no excuse for that response. I went to a job interview for a security guard that turned out to be a scam. They just wanted people to do free labor for them. In the interview they asked me generic questions like name, age, hobbies, but nothing else a legitimate business would ask, so that was the first alarm bell. Then they asked me to follow them to the warehouse where I thought they were going to show me the security work I would be doing, but instead they informed me they needed me to move boxes in the warehouse for the next 4 hours. Yeah, 4 hours. That's when it dawned on me there was no job, they were just looking to take advantage of gullible people who thought they were getting a job. At first I wanted to give them a mouthful for wasting my time, but then I thought it's probably better to get the fuck out of there as quickly as possible, so I said okay, I am just going to go and get a bottle of water out of my car before I start. Walked back to my car, got in it and left. Name, age, hobbies, mother's maiden name, name of first pet animal. This belongs on Unethical Life Pro Tips. https://www.reddit.com/r/unethical life pro tips /run ad handout applications. Get free labor. Be sure to request SSS for id theft later. I was interviewing for a customer service position at a company I'd never heard of but thought, hey, maybe it's a startup. I got up and excused myself when the interviewer mentioned door-to-door sales for commission. I told her I'm sorry, the online posting said customer service, not sales. I don't appreciate having my time wasted, and I'm sure you don't either. Next time be honest in what you're looking for. The owner of the company told me she'd come to my house and cut off all my hair if I ever shared any information with her competitors. I never shared any info about the company, but you better believe I told everyone what she had said to me. That is a bizarre threat. She was a bizarre woman and I knew after spending just a few minutes with her that I did not want to work for her. A driving job advertisers paying $16 an hour plus tips. During the interview they clarified it's actually $9 an hour, but the tips would bring the average up to $16 an hour. No thanks. Maybe don't word it like your wage will be $16 and the tips will be added to that. They knew what they were doing. I could tell the interviewer noticed my change in demeanor when she told me the truth. Borderline bait and switch. Every single solar sales job. No, actual bait and switch. FTFY. Yes, I'm a teacher and had a demo lesson at a charter school. They had asked me to come in the day before Memorial Day weekend began. When I got there, the individual who was supposed to interview me had called out, so I was placed with another recruiter who had seemingly seen my resume for the first time 5 minutes before I arrived. Knew nothing about me or my qualifications. First red flag. I was also told the principal was out too. I guess she had decided to enjoy an extended weekend as well. Apparently meeting a potential new teacher was not a priority for her. Second red flag. As I was waiting in the office, I overheard teachers and admin making fun of a sub, calling her itty bitty titty committee. Third red flag. As we were walking to the classroom, the dean of discipline, who was apparently standing in for the principal now, saw a student meandering the halls. He asked why he wasn't in class and told him to return to his class. The student completely ignored him and proceeded to walk away from his classroom. Nothing more was done. Fourth red flag. The lesson was a disaster. The kids were out of control and completely defiant. I know that part of a demo lesson is classroom management, but given the fact the interviewee does not know the kids, it's also up to the classroom teacher and admin to make sure the kids are minimally compliant so that the lesson can actually be carried out. I have conducted and observed several demo lessons and kids are usually on their best behavior. Given that one, there are several teachers and admin in the room, and two, they are generally somewhat sensitive to the fact that this random person had been put in an extremely stressful and awkwardly contrived situation. Not these kids. Classroom teacher sat there looking completely defeated the whole time. The recruiter and dean, who were observing me, sat in the back on their laptops the whole time, not even paying attention to me or the lesson that I had worked on for weeks. I actually cut the lesson short because it was actually to the point of humiliation. At the end, back in the office where we were supposed to be wrapping up, I said, I think we all know that this school is not a good fit for me. Thank you for your time. That was it. I still feel my face getting hot when I think about it to this day. As a manager, I applied to a position in another company. I met the criteria for the position. Have proven experience, good references. I got a phone call with the HR recruiter person in the local branch in the UK where the position would be, and we discussed the position, the type of interview, and got a great feeling. A week later I had a follow-up interview with a manager in the same company, but this guy was located in France. He started going over my CV, and despite me having 8+ years of experience in the position, he started telling me that I should apply to a lower position in the company and tried to direct the conversation towards me accepting that. I stuck to my guns for nearly 15 minutes saying that no, I was interested in the position I had applied to and wanted to interview for that, and not apply to a lower position. He kept insisting, so after those 15 minutes I just told him to stop, that it was really not his place to tell me what I could apply to or not, and that if he wasn't going to interview me for the position I had applied to, then that was the end of our conversation. I then hanged up the phone and went on with my life. The guy corrected me and thought he was right. Finance question, and he was off. I tried to explain it to him in a non-complex way and he wouldn't listen. Next he asked me why I didn't apply to a position via their company website. I was contract worker and liked it. I told him I think contract work is the best way to get to know if you're part of a good team without having to commit up front. He then asked if I wanted to apply for a position with his team full-time and not contract. I said no. When he asked why, I said because I don't believe you know what constructive criticism is. Great response. I interviewed at Stanley Steamer. They ended up doing interviews with 5 of us at the same time when it said in the email that they would be one-on-one interviews. Halfway through I got a phone call from another job I had applied to, and ended up getting hired in the interview with 8 other people in the room. They thought I was rude. I love that. They put you in a position to compete in a group for the job, and you put them in a position to compete with other jobs. I sell cars, and you'll have times when a customer is sitting in front of you, and will call other stores in front of you to try to start a live bidding war for their business. But it gets glorious sometimes when, during the customer's stupid game, someone who isn't being an ass will buy the car out from under them. People often forget in negotiations that both sides have something the other side wants. I mean, I've known several people that have done this and saved thousands of dollars doing so. I'm not saying it works 100% of the time, but I don't think they're in the wrong for trying to save that kind of money on a vehicle. Job performance assessment for me was making $21 HR as a third-year apprentice. I asked for a raise to $26 after completing my third year of school, a typical fourth-year wage in my area, and he countered with $22. I chuckled under my breath and looked down at my feet and said, well, if you don't wanna pay me, I'll leave. The reply was, we really need the help. My retort was, if you did, you'd fucking pay me. I had a new job 4 days later with the pay I wanted. What do you do that you can earn $26 while still in school? It sounds like a skilled trade to me. He could be in an expensive area as well, but skilled trades can easily make $15-16 per hour in my area, which is a low cost of living. Go look up local 32 wages. The first 5 years are training and you start at $25 an hour with great benefits, and with yearly raises end up in the 60s after 5 years of school. It's hard work, but you can make damn good money. $120K a year take home with a pension, full medical, vacation pay and sick leave. You don't have to negotiate your benefits, and if a company does you dirty, the union will have your back. Was applying for a youth pastor position 15 years ago. Wanted me to work full-time for $30K and my wife to volunteer as church admin for free full-time. I informed him that my wife has a bachelor's in education and the student loans aren't going to pay for themselves. He said I need to have more faith that I would be taken care of by God. Honestly, the prime example I have of why I was never successful at joining the ministry. Edit. Spelling is hard. Proofreading is harder. You might want to ask her how to spell her degree. It wasn't a single degree. Came in batches. Hello, Fed loan. I was told that God is taking care of my payments from now on. Thanks, bye. Yikes. What kind of fucked up job demands your spouse's time as well as yours and for free? Way to make your dying religion look worse. Maybe that was code for he'd split some of that fat tithe $$ with you. As a teen, I was so delighted there was an opening at the Humane Society, Seattle's local pet rescue and adoption center. Filled out the application. When handing it in, I was asked if I was comfortable loading and unloading the crematorium. Growing up comes in one little chunk of horror at a time. Stayed for the entirety of the interview, partly because I'm on the young side and decided I wasted an hour coming down here and going to waste an hour going home. Might as well get some interview experience, and partly because I didn't get confirmation that my hunch saying something wasn't quite right was correct until near the end of the interview. Company said it was an entry-level marketing position. Red flag number 1 was that like 35 people were there to interview, and all were either recent college grads like myself or recent immigrants. Red flag number 2 was that each interview was done in pairs because that's how you'll be working. Red flag number 3 was when the interviewer said that everyone in the company is expected to become a manager of about 10 people 8 months to a year after being hired. The place did not seem like a company undergoing that kind of exponential growth. And finally, after repeatedly asking different variations of what exactly do you do here and getting we protect our clients' brands as the answer, the interviewer finally clarified that it was face-to-face direct marketing, aka sales. When the interview was over, I thanked the interviewer for their time, walked out, went to a Wendy's with my brother for lunch, and promptly emailed them saying I was no longer interested. As for the final red flag, they refused to take no for an answer and sent me 3 emails a day and called me twice a day for the next week trying to get me to come in for a second round of interviews. See, to get them to stop, tell them your required salary is like 8x what they offer. The work is commission based, so they'd tell him the only limit on your earnings is your own ambition and keep trying to sign him up. Several times, I'd always ask them questions. One woman straight up told me she was there to ask me questions, not to answer them, so I walked out without a word. One was clearly an employee position, but they wanted to handle it like an independent contractor. There was a driver job that advertised they'd insure your car, but what that meant was, they'd reimburse your insurance premium, but you couldn't tell your carrier you were driving it as part of your job. Most memorably, I stopped an interview when the guy asked me what church I go to. That was for a gas station convenience store sort of thing, a small chain in St. Louis. I reported him to his supervisor, who called me and offered me the job, but it sounded like I'd probably be working for the religious dude who would undoubtedly be pissed that I'd gone over his head and got him in trouble. Yes, I interviewed at a veterinarian clinic, but before they began asking questions, I asked them whether weekend work was required. They said it was, so I left. The reason I know out was because I had a daughter who I could only see on weekends. How odd that weekend shifts weren't mentioned in the job ad. You'd think they'd want to weed out anyone that wouldn't work them at the application stage. They want to rope people in. I worked somewhere that was open Monday through Saturday and was told when hired that I could work Monday through Friday, but then they surprised me with Saturdays after I started. Shitty places try to get you in like boiling a crab. You don't even notice it's boiling until it's too late. Double same. How much of a waste of time minor details can cause is underrated. I really should have. It was for an insurance job. I thought, okay, this could be a noble calling. I'll efficiently process claims and make sure people get the medical attention they need and have paid for. Nope. In the end, they wanted me to tell corporate approved lies to manipulate people into spending other people's money on their product, all while wasting tons of people's time and violating local laws against robocalling, soliciting, and trespassing. In the end, I noped out of there after 5 weeks. I still feel like trash for working as an unpaid sociopath for over a month. Unpaid, because pay was on commission, and my heart was so against it that the job gave me depression and made me break down crying in my car before work. I've been trying to tell myself that 1, now I know better, and 2, at least I did refuse to do it, eventually, but I still feel guilty. The job was an unpaid internship. Not only that, but it would cost me $2,000 for the privilege to work there. I was interviewing at a fast food place when the manager had to run bot a deal with something and he just sort of left me there. I sat for an hour waiting for him to return. I could see some of the employees muttering and snickering. Made me feel really self-conscious. I was watching them and I saw one of the fry cooks drop an entire wire basket of fries. They went everywhere. He scooped them up off the dirty floor and popped them in the oil, looked at me and winks, blew a kiss. I watched one of the front counter girls taste the sweet tea, make a face, and pour the remainder of cup back into the batch. Then I heard the manager screaming at his staff from behind the counter. I noped right on out of there and blocked their number. The place went out of business about 2 years later. I had an interview with a school district for a sysadmin position. It was advertised at full-time and a mere wage, but was in a place I wanted to move to. I was nailing the questions during the interview. During the interview they changed it to a 2-month contract position for a lesser than advertised wage. I don't think I thanked them for their time or anything. A place that pulls that kind of stuff is somewhere I don't care about burning bridges with. Position was open for 1.5 years. Not sure if they made a hire, or if they just gave up. I was desperate for a job when I got out of college. I needed something until the entry-level positions in my field started being advertised in the spring. So I applied for everything that I thought might tide me over. I replied to this very vague job posting $15 HR in 2004 could keep gas in my car and food in my fridge. I got to the interview and they are still really vague about the actual job. And they are doing group interviews of 4 people at a time. Turns out they are one of these fly-by-night door-to-door magazine subscription sales companies. And they really meant up to $15 HR. And now we want to see your best high-pressure sales pitch. Thank you for your time. Good luck. I took a job pumping gas. As a young teacher I interviewed for a school closer to home, and when I went in the staff room on the tour I noticed that all the staff seemed to be limp, grey and completely washed out. Eavesdropping conversations uncovered a few of the reasons. High staff turnover, loss of long-term sickness, and the majority of teachers' non-contact time was being taken to cover lessons with no staff, all the time. This showed me that the staff were not respected by the students nor valued by management. I didn't disrespect the interview by leaving, but did say no when I was asked if I was still interested in the position at the end of the interview. They didn't bother to ask for feedback. They knew why, lol. I was invited to an interview as a developer. When I arrived, the first thing they did was give me a 20 to 30 pages test to complete before talking to anybody. Since this wasn't told to me in advance, I got up and left. I'm not pretentious, but I'm also not a junior developer either, and I find these school type tests a massive waste of time. Yes, I interviewed at an insurance company and very quickly it became very clear that the job was nothing like what was advertised. Like, it should have had a different job title. Different. I politely made this point and said we'd both be saving time if I left. I have a good story that happened just a few days ago. Me, a recent grad, started applying for all sorts of entry-level programming jobs. One company replied to my CV with an email asking questions about how far along I am with my studies. Red flag 1. They didn't even read my CV because all the education info is there. NVM. I answer. Next day they email me saying you got our interest. Come on Monday at X time to first take a test, code something for us. If you pass the test, we will schedule an interview. Red flags 2 and 3. Not asking if that time works and literally asking me to work for free before the interview. I sent a mail to reschedule for another day. They agreed but only left an address, not a phone number. Going to the location, there is no label with the company name anywhere. Eventually I find the name on a doorbell on a regular house. Red flag 4. I ring it, they open. It's a 3-story house with locked doors to every floor. I knock on each for about 20 minutes and no one opened. After which I noped out 30 minutes later. I get a call from an employee there you were supposed to come for a test. At that time I did come. No one opened. Oh well NVM. Can you come again right now? At that point I was half scared and half enraged, but decided against giving them a piece of my mind. This was just a few weeks ago. I walked in and stood at the front desk for a solid 5 minutes before anyone even greeted me. Immediate turn off. Finally someone told me to be seated and they'd be right with me. I was sitting maybe 5 feet from the interviewer and her client, discussing his taxes. I could hear every detail. This went on for 15 minutes. I finally stood up and said, "Why don't you give me a call at a more convenient time for you?" She called me 2 days later and we did an over the phone interview. I told her then and there, due to the lack of even mild professionalism, I will be declining your offer. Yup, my first and only experience with direct marketing, aka selling crap door to door. Took a job interview on a whim, not really knowing anything about the company. I was young. Realized what was going on as the manager was talking to me. He was a total chode. Said I had to go grab something out of my car. I drove away and never looked back. When I feel I am being profiled for my age and gender and getting questions that are leading me to mention if I'm planning a family, I immediately rule the job out. I'm child-free and sick of being profiled for being a female in my 20s. Just say it isn't a concern and doesn't interfere with your ability to do the job. If they outright ask you, then that is illegal. They don't ever outright ask, but they ask questions leading to those answers. I don't ever plan on having kids and just want to be judged on my resume and questions about my ability to do the job. If they outright ask you, then that is illegal. They know. We know. Everyone in the professional world knows. That's why they get cute about it, which is annoying as fuck. It's a little dance to try to get you to broach the subject. You're hired. How do you feel about smuggling bovine for a living? It's against my personal ethics and I don't live near farms. I was interviewing for a co-op position while I was doing my engineering degree, and I had already picked up a BS from a liberal arts college. The interviewer asked me why I decided to get the liberal arts degree. Gave him the typical well-rounded. Took all sorts of philosophy, theology, theater, and poetry in addition to all of the bias, chems, and physics that were required for the engineering. I essentially took everything except for the major, aerospace courses that the second college offers. He looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Well, I think you wasted a lot of time going for that degree, and I don't think it shows that you've got a strong sense of priority in terms of what's actually important for engineering purposes. I think it's a pretty useless degree." I literally just stood up, said the interview was over and walked out of his office. I went to my academic advisor, told him about the whole interaction, but I don't know if the college ever really did anything about it. And X200B. Second time was about a year ago. I was about a year out of college, and still looking for a job. Buddy of mine got me a series of interviews with the owner of a HVAC company that does hospitals and stuff. Spent like 2 hours or so on phone interviews with the owner, and he just sat on his ass making a decision. About 3 weeks past our last interview, having not heard anything, I go through my buddy who lined up the first interview basically saying something like, "Hey man, I just got a job offer from a great aerospace company. I know the owner and I had been talking for several weeks, but he never made me an actual offer or even a promise of one. Ask him if he really wants me to work there or not. Because, if so, I'm willing to hear him out one last time. However, I've got to make a decision on this one offer I just got in about a week or so. The owner called me back in a panic within the hour and was basically just all flustered and mad at me because he thought there was no urgency on my end, and that there was plenty of time to make a decision. In all honesty, think about on the second example. He was probably in the process of trying to win a contract, and might have been maneuvering with it in hopes of being able to bring me on. He just couldn't bring me on unless he actually won the contract. So I could understand him being flustered about it all. But you can't expect potential employees to just sit around in excess of 4+ weeks hoping to hear back on if they did or did not get a job. A bird in the hand is better than two in the bush. Had an interview at a big chain store, and it was for a seasonal position, which I didn't know until I was at the interview. Said I wouldn't be able to work Thanksgiving and needed time off at Christmas because I go on a family trip every year. And the lady said seasonal workers don't get to pick hours. You can't request time off, even if you have a pre-planned vacation. You just call in and screw everyone over, and you won't get hired after the season ends. She also said that for Thanksgiving and Black Friday, they're open 48 straight hours and you do on and off 8-hour shifts. Work 8, go home 8, repeat. She then said she worked the last 15 Thanksgivings, and that this younger generation has no respect for the workplace. Sorry, I'd rather be with my family in a holiday than at work. I was invited for a second interview and refused. BC fuck that. I waited 30 minutes for the manager to show up to interview me and then I left. I decided if she was doing this at the interview, it was likely indicative of how she'd be at the regular job. 10 minutes of driving later, she called me and said, "I'm here, you can come back now if you want." I said, "No, thank you." Was interviewing with my partner for some construction contracts at CBN Christian Broadcast Network, in Virginia Beach. When the interviewer told us there would be no drinking or cursing on the job, my partner said, "You've got to be fucking kidding me." We were escorted out immediately by security. The look on the guy's face was priceless, and worth losing any potential work there, as there was so much around at that time. We went to a bar to celebrate. Good, fuck Christian propaganda. Do you often drink on the job though? Never did. I would have went with Jesus fucking Christ, that's a contact mate. I quit a job without starting once. It was the uni days and I needed a job for a few weeks over summer. I contacted an agency and they told me that they had a job for me in a media company. Basically sold it to me as if it'd be working on a computer all day. When I arrived I was ushered into a huge room and there were about 20 people all sat at a bench with headphones on doing something. I could see thighs, shoulders moving air out. Then the boss came over to me and showed me a Christmas card. The cutting machine was obviously broken as there was a bit of card sticking out at the bottom. Basically everyone was sanding this shit off by hand. I glanned it around and there were millions of cards. Some fucking media job, I thought to myself. Anyway, I said I'd just get my Walkman from the car. But as soon as I got to my car I got the fuck out of there. Yeah, mine was the strangest interview I ever had. So the job description was at a hospital and was very vague. But I was desperate and had mostly relevant qualifications. All it stated was that it would be in a lab testing blood samples. It didn't elaborate if they were testing for anything hazardous like HIV. The hospital had 2 lab areas for blood tests, so I wanted to know. So I get there 45 minutes early and wait. I see only one other person waiting and the interview time goes by. 30 minutes after I'm meant to start I get called in and they tell me I'm late and should have been there earlier. I sit down and one person sat in front and one person sat either side of me at a 90-degree angle and said nothing else. After a few minutes I asked questions like what they do exactly and how much per hour, and they told me to research and read the job description, neither of which were on the online info. They just sat writing, ignoring most of my questions, and at one point we sat in silence for over 2 minutes while they stared at me. I asked if they wanted to see my college qualifications and they said no, we don't want to, quite rudely. So in the end I stood up to walk out and they said, "Where do you think you're going?" So I told them they were wasting my time and walked out. It literally reads like you were being subjected to some sort of university psych experiment to see what you'd put up with. Went to an Amazon factory in town to interview for a job. Walked in the front door, but there was no one there to tell that I was there for an interview. I waited for about 20 minutes, and in that time I must have seen over a dozen different employees come in and out. Every single one of them looked miserable. Some looked like they hadn't had a good night's sleep in weeks. Others looked like they'd just been given news about a family member passing away and were just trying to keep it together. Didn't exactly look like an environment I wanted to dive into, so I just got back in the car and left. Should also add that while I know I can't say for sure every employee there was that miserable, horror stories about Amazon aren't exactly new either. So I'm glad I trusted my gut that day. I had a friend that worked for Amazon and she was exactly like how Squidward was on that episode of Squidsville over time. It ruined her completely when she quit and walked out. She said she danced and cheered, and gave Amazon the double fingers lol. Yeah, we only buy Company X. They're wonderful, it's the only thing we use. I excused myself at that point, having spent a career throwing out Company X's products from places that had been conned into buying them at great expense and getting zero value out of them, or support, or anything else. I literally had spent 10 years self-employed working mostly for places that were trying to get rid of the Company X stuff that they'd inherited. All the big industry companies were sycophants to that company, even knowing what it was like. And even the local government departments would only touch support recommend Company X. Needless to say, I got some odd looks, especially when I started listing the problems so it doesn't do X or Y to you. You don't have a problem integrating it with Z, and they basically admitted that they were either all problems, or they just hadn't come up because they had been advised to do things entirely differently and in long, complicated workarounds because it doesn't integrate. I basically noped out of there and asked to leave the pre-interview tour early, with a polite warning to them. The other candidates, there were only a couple, must have been over the moon, because they could then talk it up to make me seem like an idiot. But I didn't really care at that point. There was no hint that this place was Company X associated in all the pre-interview stuff. Was an interview for a senior IT position. I literally just made my excuses and asked to leave and offered my apologies for wasting their time. Strangely, today, Company X doesn't make those products at all anymore, and has a vanishingly small portion of the market as everyone else in that industry woke up to and realized they were being conned with substandard products. When the web app revolution came along, they basically died overnight as they couldn't restrict their products to their hardware anymore. They are literally just trading on the name now, for a couple of websites online, for the few people who do the yes, I remember when everyone had those. They must be good kind of decisions with their money. I haven't seen a working product of theirs in, actually it must be more than 10 years by now. Oh, and I was interviewing for the BBC once. After tests and tours and beating out thousands literally of people to the job, I got sat in front of a room, half management types, half techies. About 3/4 of the way through, one of the management types asked a long, rambling, buzzword-filled question. I said I'm sorry, I don't understand. They repeated it. I told them no, number. I heard every word. I just didn't understand what you're asking, or what kind of answer I could possibly give. Cue half the people in the room smiling and making exaggerated tick marks on their paper in front of me. The other half frowned and crossing out. I would have ended up working under that person, so it was worth speaking up. Apparently I still made it into the final consideration but was outvoted because there were slightly more management types. I drove 300 miles, each way, for an interview last year. The pay was right, the job was in a city I was familiar with, and the company was new enough that it wasn't a corporate nightmare. I was actually really excited. The HR interview was fine. Standard stuff. The technical interview was obnoxious. The interviewer was obviously more concerned with sharing his work experience. Anytime I would try to bring the interview back on course, he would try to one-up me with his experience. Eventually, he began rambling about bad programmers and started lecturing me about all of the ways I could improve my sample code that I had submitted before the interview. He had printed out my code and drawn all over it in red pen. The thing is, PLC code differs from computer code in that the most important thing is making the code easy to read so a half-asleep technician can figure out which input isn't working at 3 AM. Efficiency is important, sure, but readability is king. I asked him for a sample of the type of code he was looking for and he handed me the most unintelligible mess I had ever seen. He really had to put a lot of effort into making his code that difficult to read. At some point, I consciously realized he would be my direct supervisor at this position and decided to bail. I tried to politely excuse myself from the interview, but he snickered and asked, "You don't think you're up to writing logic at this level?" I just couldn't let that one go. I told him that all it took was one look at his dumpster fire of a program to realize I couldn't work for him and I had absolutely no faith the company's long-term success. While I was explaining myself, he was murmuring things like "go bullshit and whatever, man." I went to my hotel, got my shit, and calmed down with a nice warm meal from one of my favorite restaurants. For now, they're still in business. Yeah, 3/4 of the way though. My interview as a tower climber. They told me to smile and show me my teeth. I did. The interviewer said I had great teeth, then asked why I had to show my teeth. She replies, "To see if you are a meth user." I stood up and said thank you and please do not contact me. This happened to my sister. She applied at a clothing place and they were going through their policies or whatever. One of them was that they were required to have X amount of accessories and a general look for the store. My sister excused herself and never returned. They called her later on because they were worried she never returned. A person during a group interview I attended also walked out. One of the tasks the interviewer had us do was to convince strangers in the mall to come with us to the store. When the time came and everyone was gathered, the person never showed up. Either the person couldn't convince people to follow him or they thought the whole thing was stupid and left. The whole thing seemed weird, but I guess they were testing to see each interviewee's persuasive skills. Definitely need to wear more than the minimum amount of flair if you want to make Employee of the Month though. Yeah, you know what? I do want to express myself, and I don't need 37 pieces of flair to do it. Reversed hand with medium light skin tone with middle finger extended. I mean, that makes a little bit of sense for brand advertising though they're employees. But at the same time, I guess the real question would have been whether or not those articles of clothing come out of their paycheck. I was applying for jobs after I'd finished college, and one caught my eye. Sounded interesting, could use my qualifications, full-time and basic but decent wage. At the interview, it was work 3 days, go to college in a different town 2 days, all related expenses out of own pocket. They only pay the course fee, even though I was already qualified to do it. This was not mentioned in the ad. Asked why I'd have to do the course when I'd already got a suitable qualification, albeit not the exact one they wanted, and was told that's the deal we're offering. I didn't go to college for 4 years to get a job where I'm going for another year or 2 to get a qualification too similar to what I already have, so told them thank you, but I'd not be taking the opportunity any further. Interviewed for an intermediate programmer seat. Didn't do very well during the test. Like I knew I'd never hire anyone that performed like that. So when it came time to have lunch with them, I just politely refused and left. When I was younger and less qualified, I interviewed for an insurance sales job. Turns out, the job is buying leads on credit and hoping you can take enough money from old people to make up for it. Left very abruptly. So you bailed on a potential job because you wouldn't have hired yourself. It was a sales position at a air filter company. He liked me enough to start talking salary, which is where I noped out. Basically it was a ridiculously complicated system where I could make up to a certain amount, but really realistically I'd be making less than minimum wage. He kind of got red-faced and bitchy when I kept saying, but wait, this means I'll be making like $5 an hour. I must not be understanding this right because you advertise this position as $40 a year. Can you explain? Am I missing something? Basically he would rope people in with bad math and false promises, and when they didn't make any money, they'd basically agree to it by accident. They'd quit and the cycle began again. Once this became clear, I politely declined and left. Twice. First time was when I was 17. Applied for a job in a bookstore in an old, large building downtown. The very strange manager took me back to his office down 2 long narrow halls and another short hall. Not another soul in sight, and I felt very isolated back there with him. The office was a disaster. Books and papers stacked in haphazard piles all over the floor. The desk was a mess with food and candy wrappers, and empty Coke bottles, which dates me, I realize. He asked me if I was available to work overnight to help refile books. I said no because I was still in high school. He just frowned. There was a couch in the office, too, but I don't think he used it for nefarious purposes because it also had piles of books and papers on it. Still, I told him my mother was waiting in the car and I had to go. Second time was when I was 21 and a newlywed. Applied for a job as an office girl on a construction site out in the boonies. Foreman interviewing me asked if I had a boyfriend, and when I said I was married he looked me up and down and asked if my husband was the jealous type. I just stood up and said, I believe you are looking for a different type of girl. Side note, I was a mature older woman when I finally realized the gleam I used to see in some men's eyes when I was a younger girl woman meant something. I was pretty naive back then. It's weird how I stopped seeing that gleam when I got to a certain age. Some things in this life are just standard operations. I noped out of a job interview at a big hotel once when I realized everyone else in the waiting area was a lot more qualified than me. There were about 50 people talking to each other about their experience and degrees. I had none of that. I really don't even know why they called me in to interview, except maybe they interviewed anyone who applied. You are overthinking it. Sometimes they are also looking for people that are just enthusiastic and willing to learn as well, but they are not going to put that in an ad if they want both, and if you were already there you may as well do the interview. What's the worst that can happen? The same thing as walking out. You don't get the job. You are also gullible, as people talking about their experience and achievements is their way of intimidating the competition for the job, and you fell for it. The less people that do the interview, the less competition for the job. What if they were overqualified? What if it was an entry-level position? Just take the opportunity of the interview, I guess. Being new in the field also means you don't have old habits to change or break. You're a blank slate, so you're better to learn new tasks than learn new ways of old ones. Years and years ago I moved. The next day went to look for a job. Came by car shop. They asked about my skills. Told them I can do automotive AC, electrical, some mechanical, engine repairs. I was 23 back then. The manager told me, you will have to take the ring out of your ear and shave facial hair. Our boss doesn't like that. I asked what's the pay. He said, how's $6.25 HR sounds? The minimum wage back then was $5.25. I turned around and walked away. I didn't know out of it, but I wish I did. Job posting said JavaScript engineer. Requirements: 1+ years of experience with JavaScript. At this point I was working with JS for about 2 years, so of course I applied, and I got an interview. The people who interviewed me were the most judgmental, dry, rude, stick up their ass people I have ever met in my life. First thing I had to do was sit through a 20-minute video about the company with like 5 other people before I had to wait for my name to be called. Lame, but not so bad. Small side note, something that stuck out to me was that I was the only white person there. Every single employee at the company and every single candidate was Indian. I thought that was just a tad odd. That's all. Then somebody who worked in the office went around greeting all the candidates and asked each person, what college did you go to? All happy like. When he got to me I told him I actually didn't finish college, and his face dropped and looked at me like I was subhuman trash and walked away. At this point I had decided I did not want to work here. I'm a dropout and I'll say it loud and proud. I interviewed with 3 people. First guy was actually pretty cool. We just talked about JavaScript. He asked me about a project I had been working on and even taught me a few things and gave some suggestions. Second guy kept asking me about my college education and why I didn't finish. It's all he cared about. Asking me how far did you get? What classes did you take? What did you learn in them? Are you going back? Etc. Didn't ask me one single question about me, what I do, what I've worked on. Nothing. Third guy brought me into his office, closed the door, and spent the next 10 minutes on the phone before he started asking me about college again, and eventually told me that I'm the only candidate without a degree, and that I don't have a good background for this position, even though I have well over 100 repositories on GitHub, completed an internship, have a bunch of live sites, graduated top of the class at Code Bootcamp, won a hackathon, and have a few open source contributions. Looking back I wish I just flipped them off for being so rude to me. Edit: I hastily wrote this on mobile. Sorry for any grammar issues. I didn't know out, but I quit trying. I was in high school and working at Wendy's. I wanted out of fast food, so I interviewed at Kmart. But as they were walking me around I saw a lot of students from a nearby school that I knew, but didn't like. When we got to the interview process the lady asked me, what was your favorite part of working at Wendy's? I replied when we didn't have customers, so we could stand around and chat. That's not really working, is it? No, it's not. The interview continued after that, but that was the moment my chances died. Once. Job description was very vague. Basically just said marketing and doing marketing activities in a selected region. Interview location was over an hour from my house. Directions were shady and I ended up in a porch of a duplex. Interviewer sat down and asked if I've ever done door-to-door sales. I said nope and I'm not starting now. Got up and left. Then I emailed a corporate recruiter and told her about the shady circumstances. Sent her a bill for my time and gas. They didn't pay, so I took it to small claims court and won. On what grounds did they have to pay? I'm confused why this became their expense. He hired the recruiter to set him up with a potential employer and they sent him to a scammer. If I was contacted to do a job and did the exact opposite of what was expected, my client would sue me to recover their losses too. That's because it didn't happen. I should have mentioned that I emailed the recruiter and asked if it was sales and she replied that it was not. She told me that the job would be using a computer program that I had no experience in, that was 10 years out of date, and don't even think about asking for an upgraded system because it won't happen. And the entire department would be her and me, and they've been completely overwhelmed and the last person in the position quit after 6 months, so when can I start? No thanks. I told her it didn't seem to be the right fit for me and they emailed me 2 weeks later with a sorry, we went with another candidate. I applied for a job and during the interview they took me on a tour of the data center. There were large sections of raised floor tiles missing and the cabling was one giant spaghetti ball. It was a disaster. All of the people that worked there seemed to be a little crazy as well. So I took the job. It's a great company and I've been with them 20 years. Interviewed for a security job at a hotel. They told me that committing crimes daily was part of the job description. Forcibly removing homeless people from the surrounding public property. Not only is that immoral, it's way too fucking dangerous. No thanks. My time to shine. A few years back, before I started my business, I was able to fake my way through interviews and get jobs I wasn't technically qualified for. I've been in the customer service industry for years and decided to apply for higher posts and faked my resume. I was able to rank up fast from being a team lead to assistant manager, ops manager, then finally a senior manager, transferring from one company to the next. Life was good, but lacking real experience eventually caught up with me and decided to resign. I then applied for the same post on a newly opened company that gives a higher pay. I was able to breeze through the initial and secondary interviews. I was scheduled for a final interview with the execs, but I had to take a mandatory exam first. So I went in this conference room with a laptop on the table. The recruiter told me to answer this 8-page problem type essay and was given 30 minutes. She left and I was alone in the room. I opened the folder and I couldn't understand a single word in that problem even if my life depended on it. I kept flipping the pages, going through the questions, and was instructed to create an Excel sheet based answer. After 10 minutes of going back and forth between pages, I decided to leave. I was already in my car when I realized I left my coat inside and had to return to pick up what's left of my shattered dignity. My ex-GF put in a good word for me at a job so that I could be considered an interview candidate. I did not want this job. We got into an argument. She threatened to break up and started crying like a little girl. I said yes. I went to the interview, was doing good. Finally, during some interview rambling from the HR rep, I was thinking about how I felt like I was being forced to do this and was being controlled by my GF just to make her happy. I then realized this was only an interview with no detrimental strings attached, and excused myself from the interview and got the fuck out. I also broke up with her shortly after. I didn't actually walk out but decided then and there I'd never ever want to work there and that I despise the company from their forth. It was at Wells Fargo, corporate, at a group interview years ago. Very aggressive, abusive, rude, fear tactics used. Like if you're not good enough, and most of you won't be, there's the fucking door type of stuff. I sat there and eventually just found it comical and would have bitched out the cunt interviewer fuckboy who was playing army drill sergeant had he given me any shit. Thinking of those poor souls who needed the jobs more than me and allowed themselves to be mind fucked for it.